What's going on, guys? EasyProsGaming here. Thanks for tuning in. I appreciate it. So today, we got some DLC information. A couple of YouTubers, or a few of them, went to a recent convention in LA, and they only played the game for about 3 hours. So today's video is just going to be a reaction to the YouTuber Iron Pineapple. He dropped a video, just some footage, some B-roll, some really cool things. Just to give you a fair warning, there might be some spoilers in here. I know some people just want to go into it. Like 75% of people want to go into this blind. So this may not be the video for you. So here we go. I played Elden Ring's DLC for 3 hours, and here are his thoughts.
Fellas,
and my reaction.
We are so back. I was recently invited to LA to attend an Elden Ring DLC preview event.
Oh my
While there,
God,
I
that's
had
beautiful.
the opportunity to play the game hands-on for 3 hours and experience the first region of the DLC. You can think of this as the Limgrave of the expansion. Despite the time limit, I think I was able to see almost everything. If you just want the
I'm sorry, hold on. Just a quick recap. This looks beautiful. Okay, this looks super beautiful. And that guy right there, I remember seeing him in the trailer. He literally looks like a basket of fire, or like a trash can on fire, right?
of the expansion. Despite the time limit, I think I was able to see almost everything. If you just want the short version of my thoughts, what I've seen so far is great, and I'm optimistic for the rest of the DLC. From Software has a proven track record for their DLCs being the best part of their Soulsborne games, and Shadow of the Erdtree is no exception, with the added bonus of it seemingly being by far their biggest DLC ever. The bosses, enemies, dungeons, level design, weapons, spells, art direction, etc. It's all top-notch stuff, and more or less exactly what you'd expect from FromSoft. That being said, the best way to describe this DLC would be more Elden Ring.
Beautiful.
I know that might seem redundant to point out, but I think it's worth mentioning because we've all been waiting over 2 years, and the hype surrounding the release of this DLC is unprecedented. With that type of hype, I think it's easy for expectations to balloon into something beyond the scope of the game. So yeah.
I'm sorry, I just have to say, they go hard when it comes to detail. They are detail-oriented, okay? And it's the small things that really make a game. I just want to point that out.
Yeah, it's more Elden Ring. If you love the base game, you'll love this. If you have issues with the base game, those are most likely still here. Anyway, let's talk details. The rest of this video will be me sharing my experience with the 3 hours I had to play the game while providing some overall impressions along the way. I'll also separate the video into sections, so you're free to skip around if you want to avoid certain things. One last note before we get started, everyone who attended the event was unfortunately not allowed to record footage of their own gameplay. Instead, we were given 13 minutes of B-roll footage to work with for video content. So while I'll do my best to match up the footage with what I'm talking about, just know that there's a lot of stuff I experienced that I simply don't have footage for. My play session began with a choice between 3 different save files, a warrior, mage, and knight. I chose the knight, and that wound up being a dexterity build. Each of these save files was level 150 with multiple maxed out weapons in their inventory. After choosing my character, I loaded into the game right in front of the hand of Miquella at the back of Mohg's boss room. I then touched the hand and was transported to the Land of Shadow. I was instantly stunned by how beautiful this area was. The sky, the grass, the fog, the structures in the distance, the art direction of this...
God, hold on. That is beautiful. I don't care what you have to say. You cannot say that they don't make a beautiful game. And look at the size, dude. It's like a valley.
The sky, the grass, the fog, the structures in the distance, the art direction of this initial reveal.
There's the fire trash can over there in the distance. I don't know if you can see him.
Is insane, and FromSoft is once again proving that they have some of the most talented artists in the industry. From this first sight of grace, it was clear that I could head into multiple...
Sorry to pause the video so much, but I also want to say it's good that they still have graces, because a lot of people are speculating that, I'm sure we're going to see it, that those, what are they called? The statues with the half moon. People thought those were going to be like the graces. I didn't think so. And then there was like something that was shared on their Instagram, From Software's Instagram. They shared a picture, and it was like a little grace in the corner. So that kind of like denied that those other statues would be the grace.
Directions to reach different points of interest. But the first thing that caught my eye was a big fire guy in the distance. So I rode over on Torrent and was welcomed with him kicking flaming rocks in my face. Awesome attack by
Nothing like a From Software game other than a really hard boss in the beginning.
Awesome attack
for no reason.
I really like this guy's design and the spectacle he provides as an introduction to the area. I spent a couple minutes jumping over his fire stomps and hacking away at his ankles, but it was hardly doing any damage. and I figured it would be a bad idea to bang my head against the wall on this clearly optional encounter
So cool,
while under
dude.
such a tight time limit.
Straight up
so
fire.
I decided to just run past him. That being said, let it be known that I came back near the end of the play session and kicked his ass by just wailing on his ankles for 7 minutes straight. Following the road a bit further, I came across another site of grace with a couple NPCs standing nearby. There was also a glowing cross with an important new item next to it.
The glowing cross. That's what I was talking about. People were speculating that was going to be the grace, but it was denied. That's what I was referring to earlier. But it's good to know that we still have graces.
A Erdtree fragment. These fragments are typically found near other crosses scattered around the map, and you can turn them in for Erdtree blessings at sites of grace. These blessings operate as permanent upgrades for your attack power and defense, but only when you're in the DLC area. The first upgrade costs 1 fragment, and then subsequent upgrades cost 2. And by the time I finished my play session, I'd raised my blessing level to 3 or 4. As for how much these boost you, I can't say for sure, but I did have the foresight to do a quick test when upgrading my blessing from level 2 to 3. I did a heavy charged attack on an unaware enemy. At blessing level 2, it did 1427 damage, and at level 3, it did 1491. If you do the math, that's a bit over 4% extra damage. One thing to note is that on the stats screen, my stats were colored gold. I was confused by this at first, but it's likely that this is just a visual representation of the blessing kicking in. Therefore, my guess is that instead of raising your attack and defense by a certain percentage, these blessings are probably just raising our stat values by flat amounts. Like my attack power stat went from 700 to 720 or something. Don't quote me on that, but...
Okay, just to recap what he just said. So basically, in your stat menu, whenever you use these blessings, your stats, the numbers will actually glow gold, like he's describing. Another thing that caught my eye while he's attacking and describing, check out those swords. Those are like backwards swords. That's freaking dope.
Yeah, that's my guess on how it works. On top of that, I found another new item that functioned like the Erdtree fragments, but for spirit ashes instead. These items converted into revered spirit ash blessings, which provided permanent upgrades to the attack and defense for all spirit ashes used in the DLC area. This came with the added bonus of making torrent tankier as well. So even if you don't use spirit ashes, it's worth tracking these items down and upgrading your character with them. Between these two new items, I think this is a really fun way to approach upgrades for the DLC, as it allows high-level players with completed builds to still get meaningful boosts to their characters without horribly upsetting the balance of the base game when they leave the DLC. It also lets you re-experience that satisfaction of collecting upgrades via exploration like golden seeds and sacred tears, but this time in a new setting and with a new twist. Anyway, I talked with all the nearby NPCs, and the general vibe I got is that they're all trying to track down Mikola and figure out where he's going. These fragments and glowing crosses were left by Mikola, and the main story thread of the DLC seemed to be uncovering the path Mikola took and discovering what his goal is. I'm not the lore guy though, so if you want a deeper explanation than that, I'm sure Vadi has you covered. As I continued along the path, I eventually arrived at a long set of steps leading to a giant door. This was the entrance to the first legacy dungeon of the DLC, Belurot Tower Settlement. Long story short, this place fucking rules, and I'm mad I didn't get to explore it fully due to time constraints. I think a good way to sum this area up is that Stormvale meets Leyndell, whatever that means. And it's pretty big. Lots of enemies, lots of ambushes, lots of secrets to find. It's good stuff. Legacy dungeons were the best part of the base game, and that is very much still the case here in the DLC. Now that we're getting to some proper combat, I want to take a few minutes to discuss some of the new weapons that were added. This is easily one of the biggest highlights of the whole DLC. I noticed that my character had multiple fully upgraded weapons in his inventory, so I did my best to switch weapons every 10 or 15.
Yo, gravity sorcery? Let's go. I'm all about gravity sorcery. Like, I live for that.
15 minutes to experience as much as I could. So first of all, in an interview from a few weeks ago,
we learned that
there would be 8 new weapon types, but we didn't know the specifics yet for what all 8 would be. Now we do. The 8 types are light greatsword, martial arts, beast claws, perfume bottles, reverse grip swords, throwing daggers, great katana, and dueling shield. Let's start with the light greatsword. This was the starting weapon for me, and it's called the Milady. This thing is fantastic.
Milady.
It's quick and combo focused, and the weapon skill puts you in a stance that allows you to either do a set of quick slashes with R1 or a jumping lunge attack with R2. Also note that you'll do multiple swings with just a single input. Like the guard counter here is a 3-hit attack. I also noticed the jumping attacks were similar, with them being 2-hit combos just from a single button press. This gives this weapon type a very distinct feel. I'm excited to see what other light greatswords exist in the DLC, since this one felt ridiculously smooth to use. After that, we have martial arts. Dude, this weapon just kicks ass. There's not much more to say. It felt so good to use.
Yo,
the way the attacks combo each other.
Martial arts, bro? Did you see that? Dude, that's so freaking cool.
Just kicks ass. There's not much more to say. It felt so good to use, and the way the attacks combo into each other was awesome.
Oh my
To all my Dark Souls 2
God,
fans,
that's so
remember the
cool.
Bone Fist weapon? It's like that, but way better. So expect a Ratatouille flashback moment when you get your hands on them. Next up, Beast Claws. Look at how fucking sick these things are. They're like the unhinged younger brother of the martial arts.
Look at the birds, dude. Look at that bird. Look at the... I'm sorry, hold on. Look at the detail on that bird. I'm sorry, but can we not get an annoying bird? Why are all the birds so annoying? Like, they're the most annoying enemies
Claws.
ever.
Look at how fucking sick these things are. They're like the unhinged younger brother of the martial arts weapon. Flying around with them will make you feel
See
like
what
an
I mean?
actual animal. And while the obvious point of comparison would be the Beast Claws from Bloodborne, these ones feel notably faster and more acrobatic. Highly recommend. Perfume
birds.
bottles are next. These ones really surprised me. You just get to throw out fire or lightning or whatever element.
Or
Surely it
frost.
costs FP, right? Nope, you can do this as much as you want. And keep in mind, it's
What?
not a consumable. It's just a whole ass weapon type. So you have one-handed
Oh,
and two-handed
that's so
movesets,
cool.
running attacks, jumping attacks, everything. The charged heavy attack was my favorite as it makes your character spin around, throwing
So
fire every...
no FP. It's a weapon, right? It's not a consumable. No FP. That's crazy that they use that as a weapon, that they introduced that as a weapon. So far we saw fire. So far we saw ice. He said, did he say electricity? I'm curious to see that.
And it's very effective in group settings. Following that, we have reverse grip swords. This is actually the one weapon type
that's
I
what they're
didn't
called.
get to try
Reverse
personally,
grip.
but luckily we have a lot of footage of it here.
Reverse
As a
grip.
bonus, check out this rapid fire crossbow they show off. Anyway,
Yo,
these things seem
yo, I can see. Okay, I want that. Okay, I can also see other people in the community calling me toxic for using something like that, as if the community isn't toxic. Like, that's fucking cool.
especially fast and evasive. Like there's one move
And
where
the
you
swords are
dash
cool,
through
too.
the enemy while attacking at the same time. Also worth noting is that you can block with L1. Normally, this isn't possible when dual wielding two separate weapons, as
Nice.
L1 is the input to attack with both at the same time. So this confirms that they're a package deal, and as such, they have a more varied moveset. It also opens the door to landing guard counters while dual wielding. Very excited to try these.
Nice.
Next up, throwing daggers. Just like the perfume bottles, these caught me off guard because I was expecting there to be some sort of consumable or FP component to their attacks. But no, you can just rapid fire these out as much as you want and fully commit to a viable mid-range
What?
playstyle without ever running out. The weapon art has the added bonus of
Never
enabling
running
the daggers
out?
to pierce through enemies. Next, we have the Great Katana.
Oh
No
my
footage
God,
of this
that's gonna
one
be so
sadly,
annoying.
but it's exactly what it sounds like. It's a big katana. It's basically an odachi, which Neo fans should be familiar with. Think length and girth rather than just length. Loved this weapon. The basic
What are they gonna call it? The great katana, like the great sword.
one has a weapon
Heavy
art that puts
katana.
you in an overhead stance where R1 would be a quick slash down, and R2 would be 3 quick slashes instead. Lastly, we have the dueling shield. Sadly, the only footage we have of this thing is this one attack here during the upcoming boss fight. The shield had pointed edges, and the moveset involved a mix of thrusting and slashing attacks. It comes with the added bonus of being very well suited for guard counters when you two-hand it. And fun fact, this seems to be based on real-life dueling shields that actually
Yo.
existed.
A
But
sword and shield at the same time? Sorry, I was like so focused on the boss, I wasn't really listening to what he was saying. Okay, so he's talking about this weapon that this player has right now, the sword and shield. It's kind of like a... Obviously, it's pointy. It looks like a dagger at the
when
end.
you two-hand it. And fun fact, this seems to be based on real-life dueling shields that actually existed. But yeah,
I had
as
no
someone who
idea.
gravitates toward goofy and gimmicky stuff, this one was surprisingly straightforward and honest. I think I need to mess around with it more before I settle on how I feel about it. So that's it for new weapon types, but there's one more big addition mixed into existing weapon types I want to mention. Check it out. Throwing weapons. These are new weapons that allow you to throw your weapon whenever you press R2 or strong attack, but they still double as melee weapons for light attacks. And guess what?
What?
0 FP cost. You can throw them as much as you want. In my play session, I found a
And what happens? Do they come back to you? Okay, so like, do you throw it? It hits the enemy. What happens if it misses? Does it come right back in your hand? That's what I want to know.
throwing axe,
Interesting.
a throwing spear, and a throwing great hammer. The great hammer made me laugh out loud because the charged R2 attack involves spinning the hammer in a circle before launching it across the room for 2,000 damage.
Okay, okay. So I'm sorry. I keep pausing the video, but I'm trying to process all this. So you throw an axe, you throw a spear, and then a big ass hammer. I'm sorry. What? You spin in a circle, then you throw it. That's Okay, I want to see that.
Think Mario 64 throwing Bowser, and you'll get the idea. Really love how FromSoft is
I remember
embracing all
that.
these ranged options
So long, Bowser.
and allowing more playstyles that seamlessly mix ranged and melee. Alright, that does it for weapons.
That's so cool.
Let's get back to the dungeon. Like I said, it's a great and beautiful area, and I just wish I had more time to explore it fully. At the end of the dungeon, I finally arrived at the boss, the Dancing Lion.
Okay, here we go. Here we go. This is who I was focused on earlier. Okay. How dramatic. Yo.
I absolutely love everything about this fight. First of all, look at how cool this design is. It's literally just a couple dudes in a costume, and you can see their feet poking out.
Do you see that? That is a spirit ash of war. The same bird from earlier, right? That looks like it. Okay. That's kind of cool.
Look at how
That's
cool
kinda
this
cool.
design is.
That
It's
is
literally
cool.
just a couple dudes in a costume, and you can see their feet poking out from underneath the fabric. This takes inspiration from the Chinese lion dancers in real life, and it's such a fun idea for a boss. The way it moves around this
Oh. So this isn't like one
just a
creature.
couple-
This is like two people controlling it. Like you said, you can see the
dudes
feet
in a
at the
costume,
bottom.
and you can see their
Dudes in a
feet poking
costume.
out from underneath the fabric. This takes
That's so cool.
inspiration from the Chinese lion dancers in real life, and it's such a fun idea for a boss. The way it moves around is mesmerizing, and has some really interesting attacks. One of the coolest things about this fight is how it'll shift back and forth between different elements. It has a wind mode, lightning mode, and ice mode, and each of these is accompanied by unique attacks and hazards all over the arena. This whole encounter is easily one of my new favorites for Elden Ring.
God.
It was tough too. I got him on my third or
It
fourth
looks
try,
tough.
but I had to rely pretty heavily on my spirit ashes, and I think it would have taken me significantly longer had I not used them. My summon of choice was a new shielded knight commander because he seemed especially tanky, although I also had the option of summoning one of the giant hands from Karya Manor. I don't typically love to use spirit ashes, but I felt compelled
Giant
to here
hands?
due to the time limit. To be clear, there's nothing wrong with using them, and the game is very much designed around you taking advantage of them, so you probably should be using them. But yeah, I usually enjoy the challenge that comes from going solo. Also, shout out to the soundtrack on this fight, and the DLC as a whole. Just fantastic stuff.
That's so
After the
dope.
fight, I continued higher up toward the main tower, but was stopped by some shadow branches that blocked my way. It was a dead end for now, but I found a letter on the ground that pointed me east saying Mikola was spotted in that direction. So I left Bellerot behind and went back to the overworld. I rode north until I found an interesting pile of bones in some shallow water. As is typical of cursed bones in fantasy settings, they came to life and formed into a skeletal dragon for me to fight. So finally we arrive at my main critique for the
A
DLC
skeletal dragon?
and formed into a skeletal dragon for me to fight.
Dude, that's so cool. I love dragons.
So
That's so
finally
cool.
we arrive at my main critique for the DLC as I see it so far. This fight was just a reskinned dragon from the base game, and while I could be mistaken, I'm pretty sure it had the same moveset as the dragons we've already fought before. If this was a
Okay.
one-off, sure, whatever. But I noticed a few other enemies from the base game being reused in other areas as I continued to play, and it gave me pause. Now look, in terms of the
Okay, let me pause for a second. So he's saying his only gripe with the DLC so far is a reskin of a dragon? That kind of reminds me of Skyrim. I don't know if you ever played Skyrim, but in Skyrim there was a DLC. Oh my god, what was it called? Skyrim Vanguard. There was like in the realm, there was like a skeleton dragon. That was cool. What's wrong with skeletal dragons? I don't see the
base
problem.
game, I'm actually very understanding when it comes to the reuse of bosses and enemies. When you're making a game the size of Elden Ring and want to include 165 boss fights, it's unreasonable to expect them all to be unique. Think about how many animations with FromSoft tier polish go into even a single boss. It's insane, and I think they do a
True.
great job of making it work.
They do.
That being said, I'm a little disappointed with that sort of base game reuse in the DLC. It's not
What?
egregious by any means,
Really?
and was mostly just a few enemies here and there, but yeah, it's the type of thing that, at the very least, made me raise my eyebrows. Surprise and discovery are some of the best parts of a first playthrough of any FromSoft game, and stuff like this slightly diminishes that. I wouldn't be bothered by the reuse of DLC enemies and bosses in other DLC areas, but I am a little bothered by the reuse of base game bosses and enemies in the DLC. Like, I don't know, man. I was just kind of deflated when I found a cave later on with a magma worm inside after I'd already encountered 5 in the base game. And FromSoft,
Another magma worm? Okay. I can see where he's coming from now. I would be a little frustrated too, seeing another magma worm. Like, we've had enough of those. Can we stop it?
I love you, but do we really need more ulcerated tree spirits in the DLC? To be clear though, the vast majority of enemies and bosses are still new, and the variety of enemies in
Right.
the DLC seems to still be on par with the rest of the game. As such, this is definitely a nitpick rather than a serious hang-up. And while it didn't rise beyond the level of slight disappointment, I still feel a responsibility to mention things that flag for me rather than just be a source of hype for the DLC. My opinions could change on this, especially when I see the full context of the rest of the DLC. But yeah, this is how I'm feeling right now. Let's move on. After the dragon side boss, I explored a bit more of the overworld and collected some items before deciding to head further east. I rode across a bridge guarded by a few...
Look at that, bro. That is freaking beautiful. I would love... Okay, I can't wait to... I can't wait for the DLC. I'm sorry, but that's beautiful.
With a giant ballista at the end. And I'm sorry, FromSoft, I got a nitpick here again. When I come across overworld hazards like this, I want them to fuck me up. I want them to be a real threat. For this, I kind of just rode straight across the bridge without getting hit by the ballista whatsoever. Anyway, after crossing the bridge, I was met with a war camp filled with soldiers and tents. It looked pretty similar to what you're seeing on screen now, but I believe this footage is of a different camp because the layout is a bit different and there wasn't a giant fire guy patrolling around. It was a neat little area, and it served as an introduction to yet another legacy dungeon, Castle Ensis. Calling it a legacy dungeon might be a bit too generous though, so let's call it half a legacy dungeon because it has the level structure of one and is very much main content, but it's just not that big. This area was fun to navigate, and once again, it's just a great level. And I even had a few opportunities for stealth with patrolling guards. I'll spare you the details, but fuck man, it's just such a joy to experience FromSoft areas for the first time.
So quick recap, he's talking about the Castle Ansel is going to be like a dungeon, I guess. And he was like saying it's like half the size of what you expect as a main dungeon. I just wanted to like recap on that. But also, look at this.
Spare you the details, but fuck man, it's...
Look at that. Look how mountainous. I wonder if that's an area you can go down in that valley. It looks like it kind of gets cut off where those trees are though. So
it's just such a joy to experience FromSoft areas for the first time. At the end of the area, the boss was waiting. It was moon themed, and their name wasn't Renala. Instead, it was Relana. Fucking classic. I actually laughed out loud when I saw the name at the bottom of the screen. This boss isn't quite as much of a spectacle as the Dancing Lion, but it's still cool as hell. Relana is humanoid with dual swords and a little bigger than the player. Lots of flashy attacks and combos. My favorite is one during Phase 2, where they summon the moon. Kind of like the full moon spell from the base game, but this time it's 2 moons. And instead of being launched as a projectile, they both slam into the ground and create a shockwave. It's awesome. This boss took me a couple tries with my Spirit Ashes, though I think it would have taken me significantly longer if I ran it solo. Beating Relana opened a door in the arena that led directly into the next major zone, but I wasn't allowed to go out there as part of the preview session. It's possible I missed an alternate progression path similar to...
So once you beat that boss, you unlock a whole new area in this Shadow of the Erdtree DLC. Interesting. All right.
How it's handled with Stormville Castle, but I think this boss is mandatory to enter the next region, so definitely a little less open than the intro to the base game by comparison. With my remaining...
They probably did that on purpose, like he said. They probably didn't want him going too far into the game. When it comes down to it, they're like, okay, you have 3 hours, but no more than that, and also you have these limitations. You cannot go past this point because you're going to see too much, and we don't want to give away too much. Totally understandable.
I spent most of the rest of the play session running around to do as much side content as I could. I found a few caves, some catacombs, some ruins, and a bunch of other miscellaneous things. Despite my initial bad impression due to the skeleton dragon reskin fight, I think some of the side stuff is actually a step up from the base game. Specifically, the caves feel more fleshed out. Like one cave I found...
Speaking of fleshed out, this whole area is fleshed out. It's flooded. But look at the architecture. Look at the details, okay? Again, details. I love this.
Near the first legacy dungeon was this whole area themed entirely around the production of living jars. It was just really visually striking and a cool bit of environmental storytelling with giant jars littering this entire cave. And there were even jars hanging from the ceiling, resulting in some vertical level design and platforming. On top of that, there was a cool reveal where I got to fight human flesh blob monsters that usually end up inside of the jars.
They look so annoying.
Here they're on their own.
They look annoying as hell.
As a whole, it was a great bit of side content and quite memorable. Another good example of this type of side stuff was this big fire dungeon with even more unique enemies and level architecture. This footage we have of the entrance serves as a good teaser. I won't go into detail here, but yeah, this is exactly the kind of thing I was craving from the base game. More memorable, sizable encounters that break the mold beyond the standard caves, mines.
Absolutely. They're not copy and pasting. They're actually designing here. Like, this is not something you can copy and paste. Like, look at that. That's so cool, dude. It gives me Carrier Manor vibes.
And catacombs. I don't expect every bit of side content to be on this level, but if they keep mixing these in for the whole DLC, we're in for a good time. After doing
Right.
everything I could find, I spent my remaining few minutes trying out the 2 other characters I could have selected at the beginning to get a feel for their weapons and spells. I've already covered most of this in the weapons section from earlier, but I do want to give special attention to the new sorceries and incantations. Some of these seem especially fun to use.
So
A few
dope.
of my favorites were the
So
Gravity
cool.
Bomb Explosion sorcery, an incantation that mimicked the beams of lights from the big flower enemies in the base game, and one where your head turns into a rune bear, kind of like the dragon incantations. Spellcasters are
I'm
about
sorry.
to have a lot of fun.
Say it again?
Turns into a rune bear, kind of like
A rune bear? So he's talking about whenever you use the incantation for the dragon head, where Scarlet Rot or even Grail's Roar, you can use a rune bear now? Yo, that's so cool.
the dragon incantations. Spellcasters are about to have a lot of fun. Before we wrap up, I want
Yes.
to share a few more discoveries that I found that I haven't mentioned yet. First, both of the main bosses drop boss remembrances. For the Dancing Lion, I don't remember the first option you could trade it in for, but I went with the second option, which gave me a new Ash of War. It's essentially a super Hoarfrost stomp, so the Ice Stomp move from the base game.
Ice
but
Stomp,
this time
cool.
it's bigger and you can hold L2 to charge it up. Big fan. For Rolana, I had the choice between dual swords and a new spell. I didn't get the chance to try out either for myself, but the spell seemed awesome because it's the same move from the boss fight itself, where 2 moons slam down and create a shockwave. Definitely seems like a fun one. Next, I did in fact find a crafting recipe for a giant fire pot, which I think is the same one shown off in one of the DLC gameplay trailers,
Cool.
but I sadly didn't get to try it for myself. So yeah, just confirming that as a consumable item you can find pretty early on. I also found a talisman that would raise my attack power if I used a weapon with a stance weapon skill and held down the stance button for at least 2 seconds. The Uchi Katana would be a good example of a viable weapon for
Talisman.
this. And I don't know,
Okay.
I just thought this was a fun idea for a talisman. While running around, I found these blue worm guys. I absolutely love
yes.
them. But be warned, if you attack them, they will go fucking crazy.
So
I'll let you
beautiful,
discover
dude.
what exactly they do when you play for yourself, though.
One thing I've noticed is, like, obviously the game is beautiful overall, but with that beauty comes a lot of suffering. Like, you're gonna play the game, you're gonna have fun, you're gonna enjoy the scenery, but you also are gonna suffer. That's just the fine balance in this game.
I also went to the southeast edge of the map and found a ruined church guarded by some knights. Next to this, there was a little alcove where I found the item America's Blessing. It seemed to function just like Divine Blessing from the Souls games, as it was a consumable that would fully heal you, but its item description caught my attention. I believe it said it was given to Mikola by Marika to aid him on his journey. It also said that Marika only made one of these. I think that's pretty interesting, as it implies Marika directly helped Mikola, and it raises some questions for how Mikola lost
Right.
it and what that means for his journey. And yeah,
And-
that's about it.
And what that means lore-wise, I don't know if you guys are too deep into lore, but if Marika had this type of relationship with Mikola, what exactly does that mean for the end of this game? So, like, also I want to know, is there more than one ending? I'm curious. It seems like Mikola and Mesmer are almost working against each other in some kind of way. That's just me assuming. I really don't know, but that's interesting. Marika would help Mikola directly, so did not see that coming.
After the 3 hours were up, the lights came on in the preview room and we were told to stop playing. Before I move on to share a few more thoughts and answer some questions, I want to provide some feedback to Bandai's marketing strategy here, specifically the 3-hour time limit that we were all given. So I think the goal here was to actually not give people enough time, and in so doing,
Obviously,
give them the impression
right.
that the DLC is just that big. In fact, I'm pretty sure a bunch of people who attended the event didn't even beat both of the main bosses, let alone all the side bosses. For those people, yes, I think they absolutely got that impression of the DLC being huge. However, the 3-hour time limit is awkward, because for people
beautiful.
like me, it was actually just enough time to do everything, provided I was playing efficiently, not dying.
3 hours. I mean, at that point, you're kind of rushing through everything. How long do you think it would take to defeat this DLC? More than 3 hours, obviously. Probably like 20 hours, I would think. Like, if you're like taking your time exploring and stuff, probably more than 20 hours, maybe even 40 hours. But 3 hours, you're not going to have enough time to really explore everything. They're only going to show you a little bit of what is actually the full capacity of the DLC.
and just kind of gunning it through the content. It
So-
felt like I was shoveling food in my mouth at a fancy restaurant without getting to taste or savor it properly. I was rushing it in
Savor,
a way that
right.
I wouldn't have under normal circumstances. And this has the knock-on effect of making the DLC seem smaller than it actually is. So yeah, in hindsight,
Exactly.
I'm not sure
That's
if
what I
that
was trying
specific
to
time
say.
limit was the right call. Next, I'm going to answer a few questions I anticipate people having as we approach the release date for the DLC.
Okay.
What level should you enter the DLC?
Okay.
So for the
What level should you enter the DLC? Sorry, I just want to. He's throwing so much information really fast, and I get it. But okay, so what level do you guys think you should be when it comes to the DLC? Personally, I think if you're already at a certain point where you defeated Radon and Mogwin, I think you're fine. Reason being is I think like anywhere and any time in the game, you're going to scale with your level. The difficulty is going to scale with you. It's like a direct relationship between your level and how hard the enemies are. Even when you New Game Plus as well. So with that being said, I think it doesn't really matter what level you are. I think you guys should be good. Let's see what else.
the preview event, we were all given characters that were level 150 and in New Game. Now, I think that was fine, but I wouldn't go higher than that. I think somewhere between 120 and 150 is probably ideal.
Right.
Assuming you're not New Game
That's
Plus.
not too-
Personally,
that's not too high.
I'd lean toward 120. How big is the DLC? Okay.
How big do we think the DLC is? I think it's going to be bigger than just Limgrave, honestly. I'm expecting Limgrave and Caelid, maybe even Liurnia, all three regions combined into one. What do you guys think? How big is it going to be? Leave a comment.
Okay, this is an important question, and one that I would love to answer accurately. We're talking about a $40 expansion here, so it's more than reasonable for people to want some assurance that it's worth it. Ultimately, I can't answer
It's
this
gonna
for
be worth
sure,
it, bro.
but if I had to guess, I'd say that what I experienced with this preview event was 20% or less of the DLC. 15% might be a better guess, though. I could easily be off, but that's the vibe I'm getting. Part of this guess is based off an interview Miyazaki gave, where he said the DLC would contain over 10 new boss fights. Now, right away, that's
Over
obviously
10?
too low of a number if we count all the side bosses. I already fought 7 bosses in this first region alone. Therefore, I'm pretty sure that he's only talking about the actual main boss encounters. And since we only fought 2 here, the Dancing Lion and Merlana, we should have at least 9 more to fight. So yeah, that would line up with my 15 to 20% guess. And even though I did it in 3 hours, keep in mind that I played very efficiently. I only died a couple times to each of the main bosses, I didn't die whatsoever while traversing dungeons or exploring, I didn't die to any of the side bosses, and I didn't explore nearly as much as I would have liked. I'm confident I missed a fair bit in both legacy dungeons, and probably some side stuff too. So realistically, this first region will take most players a lot longer than the 3 hours I spent essentially speedrunning it. I'd say anywhere from 6 to 8 hours, assuming they're fully exploring and doing all the side stuff. And then if we extrapolate from that,
6
I
to
think this
8.
DLC will wind up being around half the size and length of the base game. This is all just a guess though, and I could easily be wrong. So if you're truly curious, I suggest just waiting until the DLC is out and seeing what people say. Is the DLC too
Not like we really have a choice. I mean, but half the size? Dude, that'd be awesome if it was half the size. Including Mountaintops of the Giants, Lendell, Liurnia, Caelid, and Limgrave. I'd be happy if it was just the size of Limgrave and Caelid. I don't know if that's too much to ask for. I feel like it's going to be that big. Next question. Is the DLC too easy? Again, I think the DLC is going to scale with your level. The difficulty is probably going to match what you're already playing in the base game. Maybe a little harder. I don't think it's going to be necessarily easy. I think it's going to be challenging.
too easy? I'm sure some of you must be thinking that because of how fast I was able to do everything in the first area. Well, there's definitely a larger discussion to be had about how FromSoft approaches difficulty in Elden Ring
and it's very
what
subjective.
Constitutes easy or hard. I'm going to
Subjective.
sidestep that discussion and say that the difficulty is in line with the rest of the game and feels like a natural progression past the late parts of the base game. It's challenging and engaging. You got to remember, I just recently did a whole super hard mode modded playthrough, so going back to vanilla Elden Ring felt like taking the training weights off. Any more advice for people getting ready to play it for themselves? My advice would be take your time and don't rush it like you're on a 3-hour time limit at a preview event. Savor it. DLC for FromSoft games is always the best part, so just enjoy yourself. But yeah, I think that's about it. I've been doing my best to be relatively level-headed in sharing my preview impressions with you all. But the truth is, I'm stupidly excited. This is
Same, bro.
the Elden Ring
Same.
DLC, the thing I've been anticipating for over 2 years. And yeah, FromSoft is my favorite developer, but fuck man, I think it's pretty earned. I have a bunch of critiques of Elden Ring, and as you've seen in this video, I'm not above nitpicking a preview event, but ultimately, I think FromSoft is in their own weight class with these games. I still fondly remember my first playthrough of Elden Ring, how magical it was. The idea of getting to re-experience even some of that again via this expansion makes me so happy. If you relate to that at all, I hope you have a great time with the DLC. Thanks for watching.
Okay, end cap, here we go. So, how big is it gonna be, right? We think it's probably gonna be less than half, around half. How difficult is it gonna be? I think it's probably gonna be a little difficult, not that bad. I think it's probably going to be the same. But I'm so excited for the DLC, guys. I cannot wait. I've been playing like every day. I already have the day off when it comes out. I'm so excited. I appreciate you guys watching. Please leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you guys on the next one.